Welcome to We Don't Know Wheel F1. I'm Grace.
I'm Anne. We're two sisters who recently became obsessed with Formula One after starting to watch Drive to Survive. And today we are going to be creating our version of a Welcome to the World of Formula One guide for people who have not started.
Yeah, it's a special episode.
Special episode for people who have not gotten as deep into the world of Formula One as we have, or maybe don't even know anything about it.
We're going to try and hit some basic talking points, explain a little bit about the teams and the drivers, keep it short, simple, so you guys can enjoy all our other episodes of We Don't Know Wheel.
So when later on down the road we talk about an insane Fernando Alonso move to Haas, you'll have an idea of what we're talking about.
If that ever happened, I would die. I would love it.
Me too, but also it's Fernando Alonso, so it could totally happen.
It could happen. I imagine him and Gunther hate each other, though.
I have no idea what they think of each other, but that's an interesting question.
Well, let's dive in. So, Anne's got a list of teams, drivers. Let's hit the basics.
Yeah, so for people who don't know, Formula One has 10 teams, and each team has two drivers. And the drivers will be driving essentially the same car, but they're each allowed to make some very minor changes in terms of how the car is set up.
And these cars can only be tested at limited times during the year. So you'd think they're spending millions of dollars on these cars, but they can only test them like 2 extra times and then on race weekends. Otherwise,
Yeah,
they have to do all their testing in simulators. They can't actually drive the cars. I think that's one of the really interesting sides of F1 to me. Like, they can't get in these cars, so they're just trying their best to engineer without actually getting in there and seeing how they work. And the drivers are trying to figure out what they like without even being able to drive the car.
agreed, which also makes it really interesting whenever drivers switch teams because they will have, so they have preseason testing this past year. I believe it was in Barcelona first for a couple of days, and then Bahrain. Is that right for the second?
I think you're right.
And so for a driver who switch teams, they will have maybe 3 to 4 days of testing when they're not even driving the full day when they're at the testing. And then after that is straight into the first race weekend, which in terms of how the race weekends are set up, one of the cool things is that there are 3 different distinct days to the race weekend, each with kind of a different thing going on. So Friday is practice, where there are 2 different practice sessions. Saturday, practice in the morning, or practice first, qualifying afterwards, and then Sunday is just the race.
Yeah. So a pretty limited amount of time these guys are getting in the cars. Um, and now there's new regulations that the teams have to be letting rookies practice in these cars too to see how rookies would do. So pretty wild. I like that aspect. Although I think there are people out there who would argue that Formula One is supposed to be like the fastest cars with the fastest drivers in the world. Setting the restrictions, I think, is supposed to help level the playing fields between the 10 teams. But sometimes you think, like, how fast could they get these cars going if they could be practicing enhancing them all the time? I don't know. But it's also good that we have breaks. I'm a big fan of workers' rights.
Yeah, and that is an interesting thing to think about, if it would make much of a difference in terms of how much time they're allowed to test the car. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, I can't even imagine what it's like to be a driver with these cars that
Yeah.
are pulling like what 6 Gs or something wild.
Mm-hmm.
And that sort of like practice you really are only getting in the cars. Like we just saw a driver got to sit in or got to drive in a race because another driver was sick who had never, you know, raced Formula One. And at the end of the race, he couldn't like get out of the car
Yeah. Yeah.
because he's so tired.
Mm-hmm. It is, yeah, which it is very interesting to see all the different ways that drivers will train, because I know I thought before I started watching Formula One, like drivers would just get in and drive the car and they might practice driving, but not necessarily like work out like other athletes might. But they do a surprising amount of like cardio and strength training. And what I find most interesting is that they spend a lot of time training their and strengthening their necks because of how, as Grace was saying, the G forces are pulling on them constantly during the race. And if you don't have that like muscle built up, it I cannot imagine how difficult it would be to drive a Formula One car on the limit if you were not in the like physically right shape to do so.
I just read the wildest thing, which I have no idea if this is true, but I think it was from a driver, and he was saying that they don't usually breathe during the turns, I guess because the G force is so insane. And so they do a lot of their breathing on the straights. And because of the porpoising issues they've been having with the cars, it's really hard to get rest and breathe well on the straights. And I was
Oh,
like, I'm
interesting.
sorry. Wait, you're not breathing when you're turning? What's happening in these cars?
That's crazy. Wow. Do you remember what driver said that?
No. I have no no memory. I just remember being like, "Is this real? This can't be real." So, take that all with a grain of salt. I don't know wheel, but I think it was true.
So interesting. Yeah. So during the Formula One weekend, qualifying is what's used to set the order for how the drivers are going to start the next day. And then during the race itself, one interesting thing that I've found is they're all between 1 to 2 hours long. And there are rules about like if a race gets delayed for some reason, or yeah, it's just if a race gets delayed for some reason, there's only a certain amount of time that can pass before the race has to be stopped and finished. um which is kind of nice for both the people watching and for all the people who are working there, that like they know that their day is going to end at a certain point. At the end of the race, the top 10 drivers out of 20 get awarded points for how they finished. Do you want to explain how that works a little bit, Grace?
Um, so the top 10 drivers get points. The top driver gets the most points. The 10th driver gets the least, but it drops almost exponentially. So, like, the 10th driver gets a point, and the top driver gets
25.
25 points.
Yeah,
So
so
there's a huge difference in the points that these teams are getting.
yes. And especially at the top, it drops very quickly, where it goes 25 for first place, 18 for second place, 15 for third place. And then I think 12 for fourth. I think it'll be 12, 10. I'm not sure the rest on the way down. But
Yeah, so you quickly are losing out on points, but then it also gets interesting because those, you know, the teams that are competing more at the back of the field, they're just competing for a point or two. That's their goal.
yes, which there have been teams in the past that have gone years just trying to get one single point, because one thing that is rather common in Formula One is that there is a wide gap between the really good cars at the front and the really bad cars at the back, and it is difficult for teams to move in between.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, Williams is a great example of that right now, where they're they have been consistently near the back of the grid, struggling to get a point or two. And interesting because Williams was such a championship winning team for so long, but they've
Yeah.
really struggled financially, and then that's really inhibited their ability to make a competitive car.
Yes. Yeah. And to give some numbers to this, from like I think it was in 2018 and 2019, Williams did not score a single point, and it was more than halfway through the season in 2020 that sorry, in 2019 and 2020 they did not score a single point. More than halfway through the season last year in 2021, they scored the first point, and they had a really good driver on their team at that point, George Russell, who's now driving for Mercedes and is currently fourth out of all of the drivers in terms of points this year. He drove for Williams during those 3 years, and he did not score a point until near the end of his third year with the team.
And I think that can briefly take us to that the teams actually are competing for a ranking as well.
Yes.
And so the teams get money back to use on their cars for the next year based on how well they do. And
Yeah.
they can also spend additional money if they can get sponsorship or private money for these cars. But so, like, Williams was a private team and had not sufficient sponsorship. So they had very little money to be making a faster car. I do think it's so interesting how Drive to Survive has really like brought these smaller teams into the like public space, because it's actually really exciting to see the way that they work so hard to be competitive when they have much smaller budgets.
Yeah, agreed for sure. So as Grace was saying, there are points that the drivers get, and so there's what's called the like drivers championship. And then there's also the constructors championship, where you take the points that both drivers for a particular team have gotten throughout the year and you add them up. And the drivers championship is what I would say gets the most like attention from the media and from fans. And so last year, for those listeners who, sorry, in 2021, for those listeners who may be really, really new, Max Verstappen won the drivers championship. It was like, I saw it in headlines from like CNN and New York Times when he won, because of how close it was, how dramatic it was, and the controversy surrounding it. But Red Bull, who Max Verstappen drives for, did not win the constructors championship. It was actually Mercedes who had won the constructors championship, but it was Max Verstappen winning the drivers championship that gets all of the recognition. But in some ways, for teams, the constructors championship is more important, because that is what determines the prize money that teams will get. And so for a team like Williams, who are trying to just score a couple of points and possibly move up in the ranking of the drivers championship, in the constructors championship, that's super important for them to be able to get that little bit of extra prize money.
Yeah, for sure. So that's so let's go through the teams. And I think as we go through the teams, maybe we'll hit on their current drivers. Like each team, give a tiny bit of history and then give drivers. And we'll try to stick to one word about each driver to kind of give you like, who is this guy?
Yeah. So
Unfortunately, they're all guys. Where are the women?
I did see some people saying that Jamie Chadwick should get a FP1 slot at some point with a team, but who knows
That
when
would
that'll
be
happen.
cool.
That would be very cool. Okay, Grace, I have the list of where the teams finished in the Constructors Championship last year.
Perfect.
Do you want to try and guess, like,
Yeah.
the teams? Okay, so who was the top in the Constructors?
We're going to start from the top.
That's what you said you wanted to do, yes.
I said I want to start at the bottom, but let's start at the
Oh,
top.
sorry. No, I thought you had said
No,
top.
no, no.
We can do
Let's
bottom.
start at the top. I'm ready.
I don't
It's
care either
Mercedes.
way.
Mercedes is the top, and we're going to go with drivers for this year, not last year. So this year we've got, so Mercedes is the top. They are kind of an amalgamation team, if my understanding is correct, right? The team that was Mercedes was going to fold, and then someone came in and was like, we can get Mercedes on as a sponsor. And it's like, I don't know this history.
I don't. I'm fascinated.
This is where we need dad on here, but he refuses to join. But Mercedes really was like a Lewis Hamilton, Nico Rosberg, and Niki Lauda, like, and Toto Wolff. That's the vibe. They came together to be like, how can we make the best car? Very German, very fast.
Very
Lewis
efficient
Hamilton,
at everything they do.
Yeah, Lewis Hamilton is still their big driver, and then their second driver is George Russell. And they had been very dominant over the last 5 years, but Max just came out and they've struggled this year. They have not done well with the new regulations and making an efficient car, but I think they've worked really hard to improve it every week, but their starting design was just rough.
Yes. So another thing that changes in Formula One is that teams have guidelines about what specifications their cars need to meet. And sometimes this can be like a change in what the engines are like, which that will be coming up in a few years. We'll have a new type of engine, but it can also be the like outside of the car surrounding the engine. And this year happens to be a new set of specifications for what the like outside design of the car is going to look like. Mercedes seems to have taken a like quite different approach compared to a lot of the other teams, and has definitely struggled figuring out how to maximize that approach. And they've also struggled with what's called porpoising, which their car is like bouncing too much on the straight, is a simple way to explain it.
And that's because these cars are so close to the ground. They're essentially
Mm-hmm.
creating like suction with the ground.
Yeah.
And that
Which and
causes the porpoising.
yeah, which this year Mercedes are still very clearly like third best out of the 10 teams. So not terrible, but not the same dominance that they had from 2014 until last year.
Yeah. So the let's do one word each about Lewis Hamilton and George Russell.
Okay. Lewis Hamilton, I would say celebrity. Not in
I
a bad
love
or
it.
negative way. It's just he
Yeah.
is easily the most well known out of all of the drivers, mostly simply because of how much success he's had in the last 10 years. And I think that impacts a lot of the way in which people see him.
Yeah. And I'd say Lewis Hamilton fashion because I love his like outside interests and he's definitely got he's out here being like I'm a racing driver, but I'm a vegan and I like art. Boom. That's my
I
Lewis
love it.
Hamilton. Okay, George Russell.
Which those of you who don't know, George Russell, this is his first year with Mercedes. He drove for Williams for several years, and my word for him would be English.
I was gonna say posh. Yeah, he's just
Yeah.
he's
Yep.
very yeah,
Yep.
posh. Okay, next I think Red Bull, the
Yep.
second. So
Yes.
Red Bull, very like they are actually like a newisher team on the
They
grid.
Yeah, so they bought out a different team like somewhere between 15 to 20 years ago, and very quickly started becoming very successful, where Sebastian Vettel, who drives for a different team now, he won 4 world championships with them in a row. They until last year were fairly solidly like third for many years behind Ferrari and Mercedes, but have this year been absolutely dominating everyone else and seem to have gotten the new regulations right. Anything else
Yeah.
to add, Grace?
I mean, Red Bull, if I was going to pick one word for Red Bull, and I don't say this as a bad thing, I'd say like ruthless. Like they're out here just like, we're going to do what it takes to win. There's certainly like a sports drink that's like
Just
out here
using
making
Formula One to
a race
advertise the
car.
sports drink.
I love it. An energy drink. Sorry.
Yes. I would agree with
Yeah,
Ruthless, which can be very easily seen in terms of how they treat young drivers that they're sponsoring. And even so they have a sister team for their young drivers in Formula One that we'll talk about later. And in the past 10 years, there have been 2 times where drivers from the top Red Bull team and the sister team have been switched in the middle of the season, which is fairly ruthless to the person who's getting demoted.
they live for the drama. Okay,
Oh,
so
yeah.
the drivers on Red Bull this year are Max Verstappen and Checo Perez, or Sergio Perez. Max Verstappen, I would say, ooh, this is a hard one. Okay, Max Verstappen is young. That's what I'm actually going to throw out there.
Yeah.
He was the youngest. He is the youngest person to ever compete in Formula One,
At
and
17.
just very driven. And your words?
I'm trying to think of a good one.
I think hot take here, our mom hates him because
She does. She
he's
does.
He's also a little ruthless. So he's kind of the perfect poster boy for Red Bull. Ruthless on the track, which like if you want to be world champion, you got to be ruthless.
This is 2 words, but I want to say naturally talented. Where like
Well,
out of the drivers in the field, there are a lot of ways in which Max is driving. Like, if from the outside, it feels like to me he has to work less hard at it compared to some other drivers, if that makes sense.
well, bold. I mean, okay, I'm not going to make any comment on that. And then let's talk about Sergio Perez, or Checo as his nickname is. Um, Checo, I think like super hardworking.
Yeah, I agree. Um,
The only Mexican driver on the grid.
yeah, but I think my word would be like hometown hero. He gets insane amount of support from Mexico. He does. Did you not
Yeah.
watch like
No,
out of the Mexican Grand Prix last year? The crowds were constantly chanting Checo. It's very cute.
I'm not in disagreement with you at all. I think that's great. Okay. Third team on the grid, I'm going to say Ferrari.
Yes, Ferrari.
Ferrari. So Ferrari, the most historical team in Formula 1. If anything, Ferrari is out here making cars just so they can compete in Formula 1. Everyone else is competing in Formula 1 to sell their cars.
Yeah, which they are easily the most recognizable in terms of name and branding, and also Ferrari is the red car, the red team, and their branding has for a very, very, very long time been all red.
Yeah, and you know, they've had their ups and their downs. I think they struggle with they typically stay towards the front of the grid, but they struggle to win. How about that?
Yes. And they have a lot of pressure from fans in Italy to be the best of the best. And they seem to, as a team, struggle to live up to that pressure in some ways, or at least they have been for the past 10 years.
And my personal impression of Ferrari is that like Ferrari is also very much like a PR team. Like if you're a driver at Red Bull, you can say whatever you want. No one will
Yes.
stop you. And that's
Mm-hmm.
probably not always a good thing.
Yeah.
They're just like walking into controversy, like whatever. At Ferrari, it's very much like you are a Ferrari driver. You must be the best, the kindest, the never to speak badly about Ferrari or anyone else.
The team will always matter more than you ever will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's just the vibe. So this year, the drivers are Charles Leclerc
Who
and
is
Carlos
their
Sainz.
little, yeah, Charles Leclerc, the golden boy, has been with them for several years at this point. This is Carlos's second year with the team. um what's your word for Carlos, Grace? Sorry, Charles first.
Let's start with Charles. Charles, I would say Golden Boy is such a good one, but I
You can
um
take it. I was gonna pick something else.
I was gonna say like cinnamon roll or something. He's got a very sweet disposition. He's very beloved. He's very much like all about Ferrari, and that's like the passion. And I
Yeah.
love that like he literally has fan accounts on like Instagram and Tumblr of people who are just like, I don't even know who this guy is. He's just beautiful. And but he's very fast. But yeah.
Yeah. I am going to choose fast as my word, because it's especially in qualifying, he pulls out some laps sometimes that are just insanely fast. And he, especially last year and even the year before, sometimes when the Ferrari was not as fast compared to some of his competitors, he would find magical ways to get the car on pole, which was really impressive.
Okay, let's go to Carlos. So, Carlos, my one word. Do you have one that
I
you
have
are ready
one.
with? Okay, let's hear it.
But Carlos, I'm going to say adaptable, because
That's a
he
good
has
one.
gone through several different teams. He started as a Red Bull driver for their junior team, and then went to Renault, and then went to McLaren, and then he went to Ferrari. And at every team, excuse me, he's been able to adapt to the car really well, and also adapt to the new team dynamics really well, and has also almost always gotten along with his teammate really well. So I think all of that adaptability super helpful for him.
I like that. Yeah. I was gonna say like flexible, but I think that's too much like adaptable. So I'm gonna say focused because I think he's definitely to me one of the funniest drivers on the grid, but I think he also has a very like serious side where he's just like very much about the car, the race,
Yeah,
he's pretty zoned in.
agreed. Which yeah, I remember in one of the episodes of Drive to Survive when they're showing Carlos, I think it's the second season after he's moved to McLaren, and they show him like living in England and working with the team all the time. That definitely shows that like hard work factor that you're talking about.
Yeah. And I think they do a whole episode in Drive to Survive where they're basically like, he's very hardworking, and that's almost an insult. Like they're trying to imply like Carlos has to work hard. Everyone else is naturally talented.
I'm sure they
like
juxtapose it with Daniel messing around doing something.
Yeah, I don't know. Okay, so next team. Now this is where we get into where I'm not sure. So my guess is actually McLaren.
You are correct.
Okay.
McLaren, which a lot of last season it was for Mercedes, Red Bull fighting for the top spot, and then mostly just McLaren and Ferrari fighting for the third and fourth spot.
So McLaren is another like fairly historical team, not as historical as Ferrari, but like very long lasting, a lot of championships. But they have struggled in the last like decade.
Yeah, at least 10 years.
Um,
Oh,
and
wait.
no, it's been like 10 years since they
It
won.
has been 10 years. The last time they really had success was when Lewis Hamilton was driving for them and won a world championship back in 2007 or 8, somewhere around there.
That might be true.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
anyways.
They've really had like they've struggled.
Yes. Yeah. Last year was probably their best year that they've had in a while. They are very much moving kind of a more like young American brand type of vibes, which they have a American CEO who's running the team, and two very popular,
social media
marketable
savvy
drivers. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about the drivers quickly. We've got Daniel Ricciardo, who I think is, I'm going to say like fan favorite. That might be my word because I think he's very much like the face of Drive to Survive. He's pretty, I think not as recognizable as Lewis Hamilton, but
no, but he would probably
right
be
the
next most recognizable in a lot of ways, especially after Drive to Survive. I think my word for Daniel would be goofball. But he is the driver who's just constantly doing like silly, stupid, fun stuff with the other drivers and with the like mechanics and just like, yeah. If you watch any Drive to Survive, it starts with him, and I would argue that he's probably the driver they spend the most time focusing on. And
they definitely do.
Yeah, he's kind of like their star driver on the show.
Yeah. Which is an interesting choice as we've watched him like really struggle over the last like 4 years.
Yeah. And I also think if he does not end up getting a race seat for next year, because if you don't know, he is currently driving for McLaren, but he does not have a contract with anyone for next year. I think it'll change Drive to Survive a significant amount not to have him.
Yeah, it'll definitely be a point. And then the second driver is Lando Norris, who is another very young driver. I'm going to say that my word for Lando Norris is going to be streamer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because he's a pretty big like Twitch streamer.
He is. He helps run a whole company that's like Twitch streaming and other things. I don't really know what they do. I think I'm gonna use the word posh for Lando Norris, like you did with George Russell. I'm gonna reuse it. Very British, very like almost too honest sometimes, where he says things and you're like, do you really need to be saying things in that way in an interview?
Yeah, I mean, I think my favorite Lando Norris like clip is him with Carlos Sainz when Carlos was at McLaren and they're being asked about who's punctual. And Carlos Sainz is Spanish, he's a Spaniard. And Carlos says, "Oh, we're both not very punctual." And Lando says, "Well, my vocabulary is not very good." And everyone is like, "What is going on?"
What?
And Lando is like, "Vocabulary. That's another part of pronunciation, right?" And they're like, "What is?" Carlos looks at him and is like, "What does pronunciation have to do with punctuality?" And Lando's like, "They're the same, right?" And it's like, look at this.
Lando.
That's the
Oh,
Lando vibe to
I
me.
don't think I've ever seen
I'm
that
worried
clip.
for him. I'll send it to you.
Well, yeah. Which Lando and Carlos used to be teammates at McLaren a few years ago. Very much like best buddy vibes between the two of them.
Oh yeah,
All right.
best buds.
Oh yeah. What do you think is the next team on the list, Grace?
I'm gonna say Alpine.
You are correct. Alpine.
I'm killing it. Okay, Alpine, actually, I think maybe one of my favorite teams on the grid. They're definitely a wild card.
Yes.
Partially owned by the French government, which I don't know why that intrigues me so much. Um,
And they are
initially,
just sorry, continue.
no, go on.
I was just gonna say they're just a very French team in general. They're based there. Their car engines are made by a French manufacturer, like French through and through.
I love it. I don't know that there's anything else in life that I'm into that's so French, but I just enjoy the like nationalism of it all when it comes to car racing, I guess.
I
Um,
loved the moment in Drive to Survive where they are talking to the guy who used to be the leader of Renault at the factory, and the lunch people come in, and he's like, come in. We're the only French team. We have to have the best food in the paddock."
yes, I mean that's what I'm
So
here for.
French.
So yeah, and they used to be Renault. I was trying to describe Renault to a friend the other day, and I was like, when I was in the Peace Corps, I was always in Renaults because I was in Morocco. And so I
Really?
was like, yeah, because they make lots of like just basic cars and it's like across the ocean from Morocco. And so I'd be in all these tiny little Renaults, like getting driven around, no seats. And yeah, but I love a little Renault. Um, so yeah, but Renault is kind of a mess. They've had a lot of turnover. They've had a lot of ups and downs. They've actually created quite a fast car this year, which is fun. But it seems internally like very messy. Would you agree?
Yes. Yeah, and there have been some things that have gone on with like seemingly really good drivers not wanting to stay around with the team, and also the team being very hesitant to promote their junior drivers, which then it begs the question, why do you have junior drivers if you're never going to give them the chance to race for your team? So
So the hot questions from Anne here. The two drivers at Renault this year are Esteban Ocon, which I would say Anne is the bigger Este Bestie fan here, and Fernando Alonso, the second Spaniard on the grid.
yeah, Esteban, what will be a good word for him? Do you have any
Tall.
ideas? Tall. I wait, was he the tallest on the uh Girl the
I
Grid
think he is.
episode? Okay. He is very tall.
That's my word. I'm picked it. Tall. He's a tall, lanky weirdo.
I'm gonna say solid. Where like he does a solid midfield driver, not necessarily gonna wow you any of the time, but not gonna do terrible any of the time.
Okay, well, let's go on to Fernando. And I'm gonna come in hot and mean, but so actually that's my word. Mean. He's mean, but I love it. Like he's got that vibe of like old crusty will cut you up to win. You're
Yeah.
tuning in to watch race car drivers. What else are you looking for?
Yeah. Trying to think of a word that's not like old or long lasting.
Yeah,
Bridge
is he
burner,
like
that's what I'll say.
wow.
Super talented driver. He's won 2 world championships. He's been around for forever. He's 41 years old now, but he has a history of just burning bridges behind him with different teams.
Now, did he win what his championships with Renault?
What did he win him with Ferrari?
He won at least one with Renault, I think. I don't think he won one with Ferrari, to be honest.
I'm gonna look it up.
Okay, let us know. I
He
feel
won
like
them both
Ferrari.
with Renault.
I told you. Oh my
I
God. I
had
know
no
more about Formula One than
idea.
you.
Apparently, I don't know wheel.
Yeah, who knew? Yeah, but what he's just like crusty. That is such a he'll never die. And I love that about him.
He also seems to be the type of person where it feels like there's nothing else in life that he enjoys besides racing.
Oh yeah. There's no way you do this for like 20 years. That can't be right. But I think it might actually be right for how
It's
long he's been
probably at
racing.
least close to 20 years because he's 41. Well, he did
Yeah.
take 2 years off.
What a
But
break.
well, that's when he burned all his bridges with McLaren, and then he came back 2 years later with Alpine.
We love it. Okay. So let's see if I can guess the next team because now I think I'm really out of my depth. I want to say I'm trying to think who's even left.
Do you want
So
me to?
I know that Haas is there. I know that AlphaTauri is there. I know that Williams is there. I feel like I'm missing one more.
You're missing 2 more, actually.
Two
You're
more.
missing Aston Martin and you're missing Alfa Romeo.
Okay. I have no idea here. I'm thinking, I can't remember if the Aston Martin was very good last year. I think it actually was.
Is that your
Dan's
guess?
giving me no hints. I feel like it's either Aston Martin or Haas, but I actually think Haas didn't do as well as you would have thought they did last year. So I'm going to say Aston Martin.
It is not Aston Martin. It's actually AlphaTauri.
What? Oh, I think that really threw me because AlphaTauri is doing so badly this year.
So
I
bad.
was like, they
But they
can't
were actually
have been
decent
done.
last year.
What the heck?
Yeah.
Okay.
Where like I would say that Pierre Gasly finished in the points on a regular basis last year, unlike this year.
Not this year. This year, woofda.
Yeah.
Also, like, why is the car so bad when they're literally like a sister team of Red Bull and Red Bull is dominating? They actually stuck to the budget cap. Just kidding.
Yeah. So if you don't know, AlphaTauri is the sister team to Red Bull. In the past few years, all of the drivers for AlphaTauri have actually been on Red Bull contracts, but then they're just given to AlphaTauri to drive for them. And they Red Bull almost uses it as like a training school for their future potential drivers.
They use the same engine that Red Bull uses.
Yes.
But then they still have to make their own like chassis.
Yeah.
Would you say that's right?
Yeah. Yeah. So they operate separately, but the drivers are intertwined, I would say. If that makes sense.
So AlphaTauri, what would I say? I mean, I think the big thing is their feeder team for Red Bull. Are they a fashion company? Because
They
I'm
are a
obsessed with
fashion
that.
brand. Yes.
They're
And they're also based out of Italy, which I didn't realize.
yeah, because they're Scuderia AlphaTauri.
Mhm.
They should have better clothing for their drivers. What they're making now is a disgrace.
And they have 2 very fashionable drivers at the moment. I don't know what
That's
they're
what I'm
doing.
saying. Okay, so let's talk about the drivers. We've got Pierre Gasly and Yuki Tsunoda.
Who I would
Um,
say at the moment are like the best bromance of all of the official teams of drivers in the field.
I think
Would you
you're
agree?
right there. Yes, I would agree. Best bromance.
Yeah.
Very sweet. Seems like they really enjoy each other.
It feels like Yuki got to Formula One, this is his second year in Formula One, and he when he got here basically attached himself to Pierre and has not let go.
I think Pierre has like a lot of brothers too, though. So it
He
makes sense
does.
to
He has
me
like
that
I think
he's
at
like,
least
this is just another little brother.
yeah, I
I think he
think he
has
has like
three
four.
brothers.
I think 4 or 5.
Four? Yeah, a
Yeah,
lot.
a lot of brothers. Okay. Do you have a word for Pierre Gasly?
Pierre Gasly. Beard. Because my favorite thing I've seen recently about Pierre Gasly was like in a fan fiction I was reading, someone had written like Pierre Gasly. He had a weird beard, but I still thought he was very hot. And I was like, what is this person saying? So insulting, but then like, but I don't understand why I'm into it. And actually, I have to fully agree with them that I'm like, why is the beard? I don't understand it, but he's pulling it off, but it's
Mhm.
strange.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd agree with all that.
Anne's like, yes, nothing to do with the driving, beard.
I would say, oh, I know what I want to say. I'm just trying to come up with a good word that summarizes it. Resilience?
I was just gonna say something about like heartbreak or something because he's had
Yeah.
a rough one.
He has one of his, well, so he, for half of a season, got promoted and drove for Red Bull, and then got demoted in the middle of the season to go back to what's now called AlphaTauri. But he, since going back, has only proved that like he is a very quality, good driver. Um, and he's worked really hard to show that. And he also, in his personal life, has gotten through a lot of really difficult things. One of his best friends died in a crash. Back in I want to say 2000 and either
I think it
18 or
was
19.
like the same time that he was demoted from Red Bull. It was the
Yeah, it
same
was
like
all happening at
weekend.
the same time. Yeah, which that would have been 2019. But yeah, but he has continued to fight back and impress, and even won in Monza, which was amazing.
Yeah, we love it. Okay, Yuki Tsunoda, food. I love Yuki. I think that he's pretty like enjoyed on the grid. I saw a little like thing where drivers were supposed to be answering questions about TV. I think it was for the Miami Grand Prix or something weird, but
Uh-huh.
they were asked like which driver should have his own TV show, and there were at least like 3 or 4 drivers who said
Yes.
Yuki, which just delighted me. But he seems to in every interview bring up food and just be
Yeah.
like, "This is what I ate, and it was incredible, and let me tell you about it." And I love it.
He and Pierre recently did a sushi food test where they blindfolded Yuki and Pierre fed him sushi and Pierre had to sorry, Yuki had to like say what type of sushi it was, and he got almost every single one of them right. The only one he got wrong was there was a salmon one. Apparently, he does not like salmon.
Incredible.
It was very cute. For Yuki, my word, I don't remember who said this on Drive to Survive, but I'm gonna steal it. My word is pocket rocket. Yuki is
And
he is by far the shortest driver in the grid. He like the way Pierre has described it and some other people is that he has zero filter about what he's saying. Um, but he can at times be really fast. It's just he needs a little bit more polish
yeah,
to
I
what
would
he's
agree.
doing.
I like that. Okay,
But
so
so
then
entertaining.
I want to say the next team is now Aston Martin.
You are correct with that.
Okay, so that's not so bad.
Not so bad at all.
Um,
You've only gotten one wrong so far.
so Aston Martin, they're another one of these like this team, I feel like in the last 10 years, they have been the most like everything. Like they've been all over. They were Force India, who then went into like it's not called
administration,
bankruptcy, but yeah, it's basically bankruptcy.
because their owner at the time was
And
um getting sued for tax fraud, I want to say.
or
Something like
something.
that. Yeah.
So they've been all over the world.
Yeah.
Uh, but they have a new, like, what's the name of that? Headline sponsor?
Title sponsor?
Title sponsor, which is Aston Martin. They've got a big cash influx from Lawrence Stroll, billionaire baby, and they had Otmar last year, right?
Yeah.
And he knows how
Yes.
to make a fast car with not that much money.
Because Otmar was the team principal all the way through Force India and Racing Point until they turned into Aston Martin.
Yes. But he's left and now their car is crap.
Yeah.
Um, Sorry to be so offensive to Aston Martin, but it's not working well. Um, but yeah, I mean, my one word for the team now would be billionaire because I'm rude. The two drivers are Lance Stroll, the son of Lawrence Stroll, and Sebastian Vettel, world champion.
I feel like there could not be two more different drivers on the grid.
Yeah, that's true. I love that. I love like I think there's a video of Sebastian Vettel talking to Lance Stroll like in front of everyone at like one of the driver events on a race weekend, and he's complaining about how he got pushed off the road because he likes to ride his bikes to the races. He likes to ride his bike to the races because he's very into like environmentalism.
Mm-hmm.
And he's complaining because he's leaving the team next year and the driver who's coming next year like pushed him off the road because he was in a car with like four police escorts. And that's yeah. Sebastian Vettel, what would be my words for him? I think I'm gonna say like dad vibes.
I
He's
like
just
it.
very caring. He's seems very thoughtful, seems very focused on like actually himself as a whole person, which is really interesting among racers. Because I
Mm-hmm.
think to be at that level of competition, you have to be so focused on being the best, you give up like many aspects of yourself.
Yeah.
And he seems really focused on trying to maintain many aspects of himself. And I think that's probably why he's decided to retire this year.
Yeah, he actually has a balanced life compared to basically all of the other drivers. The word I was thinking of was honeybee. He's very sweet, and he also cares so much about a lot of causes, um, like environmentalism, and like he's worn shirts of other stuff that have like honeybees and save the bees on them, and that's just I think one example of the type of very just like caring and conscientious person that he is.
And I enjoy the fact that he's at this point in his career where he's like, I do not care. Like, I'm gonna do what I think is right. Like, he got a fine as well for wearing, they had like some pride shirts that they were wearing, and he wore it past the point where they were supposed to wear them, and they were supposed to be putting on their team paraphernalia. And he was like, no, I'm gonna keep wearing the pride stuff and got fined.
Sam, what a sweetheart.
So yeah, I like Seb. I'm sad to see him go, but I'm happy for him, and I hope that that's like a good
Yeah.
experience for him. And I think that the grid will lose a lot by not having a person there who has a
Yeah.
little bit more perspective, maybe.
Yes.
Um,
I have a
and
word
then
for Lance Stroll that I've been
yes,
thinking of. My word is nepotism. I don't think if his dad didn't own the team, I don't think he would have a seat. That's my hot take.
wow.
I think
Okay,
he could have gotten into Formula One at some point. I don't think he would have stuck around.
I think you're probably right. I'm not going to be that harsh. I'm going to say Canadian because I think if you talk to Lance Stroll, he would be like, the word that defines me is Canadian. He's kind of interesting because I feel like in all of his interviews, he actually seems like a very nice guy. But I'm totally with you in that, like, I think he's not horrible at his job, but he's not great at his job. And like, most everyone else there is like great at their job. Like even when you're talking
Yeah.
about Esteban Ocon, like he's still
Esteban
good.
Ocon's a lot better driver than Lance Stroll, in my opinion.
Yeah. And you called him like mediocre essentially.
All
So
right.
yeah, I mean, but if Lance wasn't so like if Lance was at all annoying or mean, I think people would have a lot more distaste for him. But he seems like totally palatable. I mean, something about his accent is a little grating, and usually I love a Canadian, but I don't know what it is. He's too
Yeah.
posh of a Canadian for me. I need a real woodsy guy. Okay,
All
so
right.
next team. Let me see if I can get
We have
this
three
now.
left.
We have three left. Who's the
Mm-hmm.
third one? Okay. I think it's actually Alfa Romeo.
It's not Alfa Romeo.
It's Haas.
It's not Haas.
What? How is that possible? It's Williams. That can't be
It's
right.
Williams. Well, okay. Don't forget that George Russell qualified second at Spa in a Williams last year. And then
Wow.
the race didn't actually happen. They only did 2 laps behind the safety car. So he got second and they awarded half points.
Okay. Well, then oof, that's a
So
wild ride.
Williams got 23 points for the whole season. And the next team got 13.
Okay, and all those other teams worked so freaking hard for those points. I mean, not that George didn't work hard for that, but it's like they worked hard the whole season, and Williams was just out here like one race, one
They
race,
got points in
BB.
other races too. They got points in Hungary. Both drivers got points.
Okay,
For sure.
so Williams. Here's how I describe the team: messy. No, they're really not messy. I think they're just like they feel a little bit like incompetent because they're so old timey. Like you're
Yeah.
like, you got to get with the times, babe. Like I
Yeah.
know the past was glorious, but we're not in it anymore.
Yeah.
And
And
it
it seems
was the
like
past glorious? Maybe for
they're
them.
trying so hard and nothing is going right for them still.
Yeah.
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 Which okay, so Hungary, they got 10 points in the race.
That's
Belgium,
nuts.
Spa, they got 10 points. Italy, they got 2. Russia, they got 1.
Okay.
So it was not just one race, Grace.
Okay. You're right. I'm wrong. Who knew that Williams was out here? I just have a memory of George Russell like crying as he gets his first points in a Williams.
Yep. Yep. Okay. So the 2 drivers currently for Williams, because George Russell has now moved on to Mercedes, are Nicholas Latifi and Alex Albon.
Nicholas Latifi, I'd say pay driver. That's my words.
So you're taking the
Money.
harsh roll on this one.
Money. I'm so sorry.
No, it's good. I was gonna go nice, so that's perfect.
He's not a great driver. I don't know
No,
how he's lasted this long.
he is notorious for being the one who crashes.
Sometimes it's the car. Sometimes it's the weather. Sometimes it's
Sometimes it's
Latifi.
yeah. Which he is also the driver that crashed at the end of Abu Dhabi last year, which set up a safety car, which allowed Max to win the world championship. And then, of course, the people online went insane with conspiracy theories, and apparently Latifi received like a lot of hate after that happened online.
I feel
which
bad
is
about that. I don't think anyone deserves hate. And
I
I'm
agree.
not trying to, obviously like he's driving in Formula 1. He's not horrible.
Yeah.
But he's not on the level. Sorry, bud.
Agreed. My word for him is Nutella.
That was kind.
Yes, he's also Canadian, just like Lance Stroll, and apparently he loves Nutella. There's a in one of the Secret Santa videos,
I've seen this.
He has Checo, and he just gives Checo a giant jar filled with mini jars of Nutella. And Checo knows immediately that is him.
Yeah.
It's very sweet.
And then the other driver is Alex Albon. And my word for him would be, that's a hard one.
I know. He has a lot of sides to him.
Yeah.
He's got that Pierre Gasly like rebuilding himself aspect.
Yeah, for sure.
He has a lot of perspective on what's important in life, just like Seb.
Yes, I really appreciate that about him. I almost want to be like Alex Albon. One of the ultimate bag. Is that what they're called? Like, you know how they call the wives and girlfriends? It's not right then. I don't know what it is, but I really love he's very supportive. His girlfriend is a professional golfer, and I don't know why that just delights me. I love a professional athlete duo. So I think that's cute. I like that. But I think that's kind of like feels like his personality. He's pretty wholesome. Actually, that's the word. Wholesome.
That's a good one. That's a good one. I'm gonna say perspective. Because I think that there have been a lot of things throughout his life that have taught him a lot of perspective about what's important and what's not. And he's learned all the right lessons from life, where you can tell that he has a solid head on his shoulders compared to some of the other drivers.
Okay, let's hit the next two teams. So we're down to two now.
We're down to two.
I'm getting worried that Haas is the bottom team, but I'm just gonna give it a guess and say Haas again. No.
Haas was like
Nikita,
2 laps down most of the races last year, Grace.
I forgot how bad Nikita was. I was thinking about Kevin Magnussen. Okay.
It was both of them were terrible.
Yeah, I know, but
anyways.
So Alfa Romeo.
Yes, Alfa Romeo is ninth.
Alfa Romeo is kind of like a feeder team for Ferrari. They're not like super officially linked, but they're at least somewhat officially linked.
Yeah, somewhat similar to the AlphaTauri and Red Bull relationship, but I think the relationship is not quite as strong. And a lot of times,
but a lot of the drivers go back and forth.
Yeah, and Ferrari wants to try and make sure that at least one of the Alfa Romeo seats is for a potential future Ferrari driver. Like Charles Leclerc started at what turns into Alfa Romeo for 1 year before he went to Ferrari. I think one of the drivers last year, Antonio Giovinazzi.
Oh, and
potential future Ferrari driver.
Kimi Räikkönen went from Ferrari to Alfa Romeo.
Yeah. So they're Swiss. They very much a midfield team, mostly around because of that Ferrari connection. I can't really think of anything else.
I like their cars.
Distinguishing.
Because they're Sauber, right? They're Sauber Alfa Romeo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they used to just be called Sauber.
Yeah. So we're here for it. Their drivers this year are Valtteri Bottas and Zhou Guanyu. Did I say it right?
Zhou Guanyu.
Zhou Guanyu. Valtteri Bottas. I want to just be like Finn, but
I know, me too.
Yeah. He's, I don't know, like I think he to me feels like someone who has a lot of mental strength. So I think that's what I want to use as my word.
I like it. Yeah, he drove for Mercedes for 5 years, trying to compete against Lewis Hamilton and never really being able to do that. And it's hard to imagine the strength that must have taken to just continue to try to do his best.
Yeah, that's what I think about.
Yeah, agreed.
Very likable, and he also has an athlete girlfriend.
He does. They're very cute together. I think everything on his Instagram is either like coffee or bike riding with his girlfriend. It's one or the other. I'm gonna say hobbies because it's very clear like what his passions are and he sticks to those things. Where like going back to Finland when he can, going in the sauna, making coffee, drinking gin, bike riding. And
My hobby.
he's turned all of those into like either brand partnerships or like products that he's making and selling.
I love being like, my hobby is gin. I'm
He
a
does have a
driver.
gin that he sells.
I know. Yeah. Yeah. And then Zhou Ganyu. Um, the is he the first? He's the only current Chinese driver on the
I
grid.
think he might be the first. Let me
I
double
think
check that
he's the
one.
first. Um, I have no idea if this is true or not, but I want to be my word to be fashion as did I use that for Hamilton already?
You definitely use
No.
that for Hamilton. I'm sorry.
Shogun Yu though, he's so fashion.
He is the first Chinese driver to compete in Formula One.
He I'm gonna say for this season, but not for life. A little bit unlucky. That's the word I'm gonna use.
I was thinking about using that as well. Yeah, he in the beginning of the year in particular, he had some bad luck with either crashes that were not his fault or his car crapping out on him. And then in addition to that, once that bad luck started to go away, Alfa Romeo's car was just not as fast comparatively as to how it had been. So he has been struggle
He's
busting a bit.
just too close to Nicholas Latifi on the grid.
You're not wrong,
I know.
unfortunately.
Okay, let's hit Haas now. Finally, to
I
the
did not
top
get to
team
give
on
a
the grid.
word for
Okay,
Joe
sorry,
Guan
sorry.
Yu, Grace. I would say surprisingly decent in
That's
terms
like
of like
6 words.
surprisingly decent is 2 words. In
Okay.
terms of like he has not been like through a fault of his own crashing the car out every week and like he has been out qualifying Bottas, which that has usually been one of Bottas's strengths, and yeah, he's been doing surprisingly well even if the points don't always show it.
And I really like that little friendship too. I don't think they have the bromance of Pierre and Yuki, but they seem quite close.
Agreed. Yes. All right. Finally, we have
We're finally to the top team in our family, top of the hearts in our family, the Haas F1 team, the only American team on the grid. I don't think they're American at all, but I love that that's how they want to sell themselves.
I may or may not have gotten Dad a Haas hat for his birthday, which he may or may not wear all the time.
Yeah, great team. Great team. Apparently really struggled last year.
Well, they also like they designed a car and then put zero money, time, or effort into developing the car at all over the season because they were putting everything into 2022.
Yeah, I mean, I think Haas is such a thrifty little outfit that's just, I saw Anne sent me maybe yesterday a video of Trevor Noah talking with Gunther, who's the team principal of Haas, and just saying how much he enjoyed him on Drive to Survive and how fun it was to see these mid or lower field teams and how they make it work. And it makes you like love them because you're like, these guys are competing on shoestring budgets essentially in Formula One. And like
Yeah,
they're just out here for the love of the sport. Like they all are probably, but
yeah,
I mean, these guys they're diehards.
yeah. I once heard someone talking about Drive to Survive, and they were essentially saying the fact that Mercedes and Ferrari didn't want to participate in the first season of the show is probably one of the best things that ever happened to Drive to Survive because they had to go and search for other really good storylines, which turned into Daniel Ricciardo and Haas.
Yeah,
And like those are still two of the most like consistently popular things about Drive to Survive.
I completely agree. And I think like last year's Drive to Survive to me kind of struggled because there was way too much focus on the championship And I
Yeah.
was like, I'm tuning in here for these like unsung hero stories. Like I
Or at the very
do,
least, like footage you hadn't seen before and information
yeah.
you didn't know before.
And it's interesting getting more into the like produced content of Formula One because it is harder to get more information about these mid and lower field teams.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's just not as much put out. The interviews aren't as long. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so I see how people become fans of just like the top drivers because
Yeah.
they're the ones that are out there to hear about.
Yeah, and even like the way that it's structured, where it's so after qualifying, the top three from qualifying will get interviewed. After the race, the top three winners from the race have a big press conference. And so those are the drivers that you see and hear from the most often.
Yeah. And I'm like, give me my Gunther content. But yeah, I mean, like, yeah, I love Gunther. I love that he's so thrifty. I love that he's so German. I love
Mhm.
that he's basically like nobody in, nobody out. We optimize from the inside. Like,
Even
incredible.
when two of our mechanics mess up a pit stop, they won't get fired.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I think that he's completely right. And I think, like, if he had some more stability financially, I think that he
Mhm.
honestly could turn Haas into like a very serious midfield contender.
Yeah.
Um,
And they have
but
been doing much better this year compared to last year.
yeah, and I think that's a hard thing is like he is probably spending so much of his time just trying to make the team financially viable.
Yeah.
And that takes a lot of energy.
Yeah.
Um,
So
drivers, we've got Kevin Magnussen, K Mag, and Mitch Schumacher.
Mick.
Mitch. No, I don't know why I want his name to be different. Mick.
Oh my gosh.
You know,
Uh,
I'm not out here. I'm not a Mick girly. Sorry. I want to love him. Don't get it. We've talked about it.
we have. Okay. Do you have a word for Kevin Magnuson?
Kevin Magnuson, you know what I want the word to be. He's just like, honestly, he's crotchety. That's the word that I'm going to
Ooh,
use.
that's a good one.
And it's like, he embraces it. He's like, I am who I am. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
I
we were talking about this morning before we got on the podcast, but like he's an interesting driver because he can be so good, but he doesn't always have those like consistent results.
mm-hmm. And well, even when he's like being consistent, like he's finishing, he's not crashing the car, he's doing okay. He's not being consistently good. He's being consistently okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm struggling to come up with a word for him. Um,
The most unsportsmanlike driver on the grid. That's what Nico Hulkenberg called him one time.
jumping at opportunity. Because like when so he got his seat for this year after having previously driven for Haas for like 4 or 5 years, and then at the end of 2020 not being re-signed when the driver that Haas was planning on having for 2022, who was from Russia, did not end up racing for the team.
I love how
And
you say it like it just happened. He wasn't able to.
I
Not like
didn't
his
think
dad's
we
a
needed to go
freaking
into all of it, but we can if you want.
Russian oligarch. And then my favorite part of that story, his dad's a Russian oligarch. Haas obviously realizes like this will be a PR nightmare for us because he definitely is like a Putin supporter as well. It's not just
Oh,
like
well, you don't
Russian
become an
oligarch.
oligarch unless you're
Yeah,
appointed by Putin.
exactly. I mean,
Yeah,
it's not an appointed position, but
chosen, whatever you
chosen,
want to call
yes.
it.
But then he starts a charity for athletes who can't compete due to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And it's like incredible.
Yeah,
Incredible.
yeah,
Like,
but yeah. But anyways, when that whole situation went down, Kevin Magnuson not only took advantage of it to get back full time with Haas, but he also negotiated to get a multiple year contract, which I felt like was pretty impressive.
Super
like, I'm
impressive.
coming back and I'm staying.
And he literally like broke a door the season that they asked him to leave because he was like mad because Gunther yelled at him or something. Incredible. Like, wow, how did he do it?
Yeah.
So, you know, I don't know that Kevin Magnuson should. I'm going to stop talking about him because I don't want to get in trouble with him. I don't know.
He's one of the drivers that I feel like does not have a giant fan base.
Yeah. I mean, I like him the most because of his crotchety nature. So that should tell you something. I like Nico Hulkenberg more. Oh, he's not even a driver.
Oh, hot take.
I do. Sorry. I do. How can you not? I don't know who's out here saying they like Kevin Magnuson more than Nico Hulkenberg.
At least Nico Hulkenberg is entertaining.
Ooh, Anne said it, not me, but I think she's right. Okay, let's talk
At least
about
he has a good storyline.
Anne's fave.
I don't know why you think he is my favorite, Grace.
I don't know. I just do. I feel very strongly that this is the truth.
When Checo is clearly my favorite by far.
Yes. But if Checo wasn't on the grid, you'd be a Mick fangirl.
I think I'd be a Charles fangirl. Anyways, Mick Schumacher, son of Michael Schumacher.
That's
Oh,
like they spend so much time, I think, on Drive to Survive talking about Carlos Sainz Jr. and Sr. And like there's some room for that, but I'm like, I honestly feel like Carlos seems fairly well adjusted and has a dad who's very like, you do whatever you want, kid, and I'm here to help you and I love you. And
yeah.
if you want my advice, I'll give it to you, but whatever. Mick, that's a way more interesting father son dynamic that I'm
Agreed.
sure that they're probably not really allowed to explore. But yeah, like I can't imagine what it's like to have a dad who was what, 7-time world champion?
Mm-hmm.
And now really can't even communicate with me or like
well, we're not even really sure.
We're not sure, but seems like communication isn't what Mick would have wished. I think he's alluded to that at a minimum, that he wishes he could talk to his dad about F1.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now I'm sad.
Which I know. Okay, related to that, my word for Mick Schumacher is going to be little brother. It feels like he's like the little brother of the grid that all the other boys want to take care of and make sure he's doing okay. And he's just like a sweetheart.
Yeah. I would say too nice. Like,
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, which that's not a bad thing. I think like in the end, I honestly, I don't know. For myself, I'm like, we've talked about how I think you really have to be ruthless to be successful at this sport, but there's a lot to be said for like, I find the people who don't find that that's their initial instinct to be much more enjoyable people to watch and see on the grid because and honestly sometimes even having that killer instinct still doesn't mean that you are going to be a winner, because I would kind of argue that I think like Kevin Magnuson, he kind of has that instinct.
Yes.
But then that still doesn't mean that he's a winner. Or like Fernando Alonso, like he's got the instinct. It worked for him for a couple years, but it's also been his downfall sometimes.
The burner of bridges.
Yeah.
Yeah. Agreed.
And I mean, you and I, did you watch the Schumacher documentary?
I did, but a while ago.
Okay. I watched it recently. And I do like, I think that that did a nice job of like not shying away from the fact that like, I mean, he was ruthless. He was out here like, you were in my driving line and I just ran you over. Like, what did you want me to do?
He was totally ruthless.
And, you know, that's
he was also he was ruthless,
but he wasn't always successful.
Mm-hmm. Where like he was one of the only drivers in recent history that has actually gotten Ferrari to get its crap together so he could win world championships. And Charles has not done that.
Yeah, I think that if we're just to like go off track for 1 second and talk briefly about Ferrari. I think that honestly, like, I think that Charles is faster. I think that Carlos actually has a better handle on like the interpersonal necessity of being like, sometimes you have to listen to me.
Yes, but like in Monaco, Carlos just ignored them when they said you need to come in for intermediate tires. He was like, no, we need to wait for slicks. And he did it. And he ended up third and sorry, he ended up second and not fourth like Charles did.
Yeah. And I think speaking of drivers who I don't know like that necessarily have that like killer instinct or whatever, like I don't think that that's like Carlos's instinct. He has talked in interviews about how like the best advice he ever got was from his dad, and it was like bite or be bitten. And
Oh.
I think it's really interesting to think about a driver who's like, that's actually not my natural instinct, but I cultivated it because that's what you need to win. And I think that's why he's one of those drivers who has like such good relationships off the grid. And I honestly think it's maybe partially why he's not winning more as well, though, because that's not like
Yeah.
his instinct. It's something he's trying to like cultivate.
Yeah. But he's also having to compete with Charles being the golden boy. And like the
I'm not
Ferrari
touching that.
incompetence of the year.
Yeah.
And if you put those two things on top of each other, trying for Carlos to win a race is really difficult. Like he lucked out with the fact that he won Silverstone, and if he hadn't won that, I don't think he was going to get another chance.
I think he made his own luck there. But I actually think
yeah,
on Ferrari's side, super smart to have those two be your two drivers right now, because you have one driver who's really good at developing, almost like developing the team wherever he goes. And honestly, that's what Ferrari needs, because they're, I don't know, that seems like the thing they've struggled with.
Yeah.
And then to have the second driver just be like crazy fast. That's a smart strategy.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. You'll have to bring your Checo Red Bull insights next time.
Will do. I am very excited to watch the competition for second for the rest of the season, because so Checo has 253, Charles has 252, George Russell has 207, Carlos Sainz has 202.
Yeah, it's close.
So
I'm
four of them
excited
are
too.
within approximately 50 points of each other. So that will be exciting.
Yeah, that'll definitely be some good racing to watch. But I think we've kind of hit on the big aspects of Formula One.
Yeah. I hope you enjoyed our kind of guide to how Formula One works and the different teams and the different drivers. Hopefully it's helpful in some way, shape, or form.
Maybe not our most exciting episode, but maybe a little more insight into what we're watching.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us on the We Don't Know Wheel F1 podcast.
We'll see you out on the racetrack next week in Circuit of the Americas.
Austin! I'm still waiting on the Danny Rick in a cowboy hat content. It's all pictures from last year and I'm getting annoyed. But it's got to be coming soon.
It will be here so soon. I mean, I'm already loving his cowboy merch. So
have you bought
incredible? Some? No, no. I'm not made of money, Anne.
All I saw about the merch after it dropped was people complaining about how expensive it was.
Yeah, but like, what do you expect? The man just lost his job.
For which he's getting paid $20 million.
Is that confirmed?
No.
Okay. Yeah. And that's I always wonder about that too.
It.
Speaking of like finances, like some of these drivers are making bank, but the salaries range from like 100,000 to like 20, 30 million.
Yeah. Which one thing we didn't touch on is in between the different teams, how much money they have to play with is vastly different. And it used to be even more different before the cost cap got created a few years ago. I feel like we could do like 4 introduction to F1 podcasts. but
I know, but I think that's too many. But yeah, I think we talked about that a little bit. Like there's quite a variation in how much money these teams are working with.
very much
Um,
so.
but yeah, well, we'll see you at Circuit of the Americas.
See you there.
Kota.